The Corvette, Chevelle, and Camaro typically are the cars that get all of the recognition when we're talking about the holy grail of GM performance products in the late 60s to early 70s. But there was another option in the GM catalog from 1970 to 1971 that seemed to fly under the radar in period and throughout history. But it was a serious performance contender with a personal luxury twist that the other bow-tie bruisers didn't offer. It was the muscle car for middle management, and the sophisticated choice for those who wanted Chevelle performance out of a well-appointed driver. It was the 1970 to 1971 Monte Carlo SS 454. Now, believe it or not, the inception of the Monte Carlo SS all started with the 1958 Ford Thunderbird many years earlier, which ditched its sporty two-seat setup for a more luxurious four-seat layout, and it sold like hotcakes. GM took notice, and by the mid to late 60s, the market had become flooded with stylish, upscale coupes. Cars like the Buick Riviera, the Oldsmobile Toronado, and the Pontiac Grand Prix. All of them had some decent performance options, but they didn't just burn rubber, they exuded status. And for Chevrolet, the entry-level brand of GM's lineup, that meant one thing: they needed a player in the game. Enter the Monte Carlo. Conceived under Chevrolet General Manager Pete Estes and initially known as Concours, the Monte Carlo was Chevy's answer to Pontiac's smash hit Grand Prix. But by the time the car itself was greenlit, Estes $4 million worth of cocaine. But we can brush over that fact for the sake of this story. He would help give Chevy a dose of upscale swagger. The Monte Carlo officially was introduced in the fall of 1969 for the 1970 model year, and it hit the market with a 6-foot-long hood, concealed wipers, and just enough chrome to make a Buick blush. Built on a version of the GM A-body platform shared with the Chevelle 4-door for an extra 4 inches of wheelbase compared to the Chevelle Coupe, the Monte Carlo was all about presence. It shared some parts with its muscle-bound sibling, but it had a personality all its own. Chevy marketed the Monte Carlo as a lot of luxury, a lot of performance, and a lot of value. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Now, the standard Monte Carlo wasn't necessarily a slouch either. Every single model came with a V8 under the hood. There was no need to slum it with a straight 6 inside this coupe. The base engine was a 350 cubic inch small block, which put out a respectable 250 horsepower, paired with a column-shifted 3-speed manual if you desperately needed to cut costs. And if you had a little more cash and a heavier foot, you could step up to a 300-horse 350, a 400 small block, or even a 402 with 330 horsepower. A Muncie 4-speed M20 was also available if you wanted a manual. But for those who weren't fans of rowing their own gears, Chevy offered everything from a 2-speed power glide to a turbo hydromatic. The Monte Carlo was a car that you could tailor to your tastes, from mild cruiser to boulevard brawler. But none of these setups prepared you for what would happen when you checked one very specific box on the order form. Because if you were the kind of driver who liked your luxury with a side of thunder, Chevy had something that was for you. It was a $420 option that turned the genteel Monte into a muscle-bound menace. It was the SS 454 package that made it the ultimate sleeper in a velvet robe. The SS 454 package, officially known as RPO Z20, was the secret weapon. It transformed the Monte Carlo from a gentleman's cruiser into a luxury-wrapped missile. At its core was the LS5 454 cubic inch Mark IV big block, with a 10.25:1 compression ratio, a quadrajet 4-barrel carb, and a hydraulic lifter cam. This engine was conservatively rated at 360 horsepower and an asphalt-twisting 500 foot-pounds of torque. In actuality, though, real-world horsepower figures may have been closer to the 400 mark. Motor Trend clocked a 0 to 60 time at 7 seconds flat, and a 14.9 quarter mile at 92 miles per hour. Now, that is muscle car territory in a car that came with simulated wood trim, an electric clock, and a near 4,000-pound curb weight with that heavy rat motor. Backing up all of the 454 equipped cars was the Turbo Hydromatic 400, a 3-speed auto that was known for its bulletproof durability and ability to shift smooth or aggressively if you needed it to. No manual was offered with the 454, despite rumors and some sales literature hinting at a 4-speed option. There have yet to be any confirmed sales slips to substantiate those claims. But even then, with the automatic, it did need a wingman. That transmission could handle everything the LS5 could throw at it. Now, to ensure the kind of power and torque this motor had didn't overwhelm the chassis, Chevrolet beefed up the entire driveline as well. A 12-bolt rear came standard with a 331 final drive ratio, and buyers could also option it with Positraction. But in 1971, the optional Positraction rear gear ratios was a 256-to-1, which was a lot better for long highway hauls, but it was certainly less ideal for track days or stoplight racing. That ratio was corrected back to a standard 331 for the Posi in the following year. And these longer gears, i.e. the 256s, would have definitely explained a 4.9 quarter-mile time. A different gear could have greatly improved those numbers. Even still, though, the SS454 wasn't just about going fast in a straight line. Chevy's engineers knew that with that big engine alone, it wasn't necessarily a great grand tourer. So they outfitted the Monte SS with the F41 Performance Suspension Package. This included heavy-duty springs and shocks, boxed rear control arms, frame stiffeners, and anti-roll bars front and rear, 1.125 inches up front and 0.88 inches in the rear. And to top it all off, the SS came with the G67 automatic level control suspension system. This was a vacuum-operated air shock setup that kept the rear suspension level no matter how many golf bags, briefcases, or secret crates of moonshine that you were hauling. Stopping power was pretty important at the time, but not paramount. So up front, you had 11-inch power disc brakes with single piston calipers, and the rear relied on 9.5-inch drums. These were definitely not track-ready by modern standards, but they were competent for the time, especially with the wider G70-15 bias-belted tires that came on the Monte SS's with the 454. And those tires were mounted on a set of steel wheels with turbine covers that were standard in 1970, but buyers could also option for 15x7 rally wheels for a sportier look. Visually, the Monte Carlo SS was remarkably restrained. No hood scoops, no stripes, just a discreet SS 454 emblem tucked into the rocker panel trim on the front fender. And in 1971, a small SS badge was added to the rear panel. You had to know what you were looking at, and that was part of the appeal. It wasn't shouting at you from across the parking lot. It was more so whispering. The Monte Carlo SS returned for 1971 after its initial 1970 model year, but by this point the writing was already on the wall. While the core of the package remained the same, including the 454 LS5, the F41 suspension, and the same transmission, government regulations forced Chevy to drop the engine's compression ratio from 10.25-to-1 down to just 8.5-to-1 in response to looming emission standards and the shift to unleaded gasoline. Chevy still rated the motor at 360 horsepower, but it was clear that the high-performance era was beginning to feel the squeeze. Visually, the 71 model wore a slightly revised grille with fewer vertical bars, rectangular parking lamps, and some more squared-off headlight bezels. And the rally wheels would become standard equipment. But those changes weren't anything that would boost sales. Despite the SS454's impressive performance credentials and subtle swagger, it never really caught fire with the buyers. In 1970, just 3,800 units were sold, and in 71, that number dropped to just 1,900. Compare that to the 145,000 Monte Carlos sold in 1970 overall. It's clear that the SS454 was a niche offering. Maybe it was too subtle for its own good, or maybe those hungry for power and performance were still just opting in for the Chevelle SS instead. Either way, the 454 Monte SSs were discontinued after 71, quietly bowing out before the muscle car world began its long, slow fade into the malaise era. Price-wise, the Monte Carlo SS offered a compelling value. A base model Monte started at around $3,100 US, while an SS package added $400 to that. Now, that would be $3,500 for a pretty serious performance car. But with most Monte Carlos, people wanted the more luxurious options. After all, that's why they were buying these cars over a Chevelle, which routinely drove prices up deep into the mid to high $4,000 range with the 454. In period tests, the Monte Carlo SS routinely held its own against the big dogs of the personal luxury field. Motor Trend pitted it against the Thunderbird and the Grand Prix, and they liked the Chevy more. It was praised for its mix of comfort, performance, and value. It was the muscle car for grown-ups, the kind of car that you could drive to a board meeting or a backroad burnout session without switching outfits. In the end, though, the 70 to 71 Monte Carlo SS 454 was a rare and fascinating intersection of the two worlds, big block muscle and personal luxury. It was understated, underrated, and unfortunately, easily forgotten. While it never matched the Chevelle street cred or the Camaro spotlight, it did carve out a niche all its own, although a small one. And today, with fewer than 6,000 being built over the 2 years, you aren't very likely to see many of these velvet hammers. Let me know if in period you would have sprung for the Monte Carlo SS for that added luxury, or if you would have just stuck with the Chevelle SS for the performance bargain. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.